Your annual blood test came back normal, blood sugar, acceptable, not diabetic, not even close. But a landmark study published in the journal Neurology measured the hippocampus, the brain's primary memory center, in adults with exactly that kind of result: blood sugar within range, no diagnosis. In the participants whose blood sugar ran consistently at the higher end of acceptable, hippocampal volume was smaller. The memory center had been quietly shrinking, not because of diabetes, because of what researchers now call the gray zone. Most people over 60 aren't thinking about their blood sugar when they're thinking about their memory. They're thinking about the name that slipped at the wrong moment, the sentence that started clearly and then just stopped somewhere in the middle. That afternoon hour when the brain feels like it's running on a frequency that used to be stronger. Research shows this experience is incredibly common after 60, and most people are told the same thing. It is just aging. The brain slowing down, nothing to be done. But the research points to something more specific. Cognitive aging doesn't happen uniformly or randomly. It concentrates in the hippocampus, the region the brain uses to form and retrieve memories. And the hippocampus is acutely sensitive to one factor most adults track regularly but rarely connect to brain health: the number on that annual blood test, the one that said normal. In this video, you'll learn what the neurology research actually found, not just the association, but the mechanism that explains it. Why blood sugar in the so-called acceptable range still matters for the brain, what the gray zone is, and whether you might be in it without knowing it. And you'll hear about a scenario that reflects what researchers consistently observe. A 68-year-old whose blood tests looked fine on paper until someone looked at the right number. Let's start with what chronic high blood sugar actually does inside the brain. The hippocampus needs a precise chemical environment to function. Its neurons are among the most metabolically active in the entire central nervous system. They burn more energy, they communicate faster, and they are more vulnerable to disruption when that environment shifts. When blood sugar runs high, not diabetic level high, but consistently elevated within what many labs still report as normal, two things happen that directly affect the hippocampus. The first is inflammation. Elevated blood glucose triggers a low-grade inflammatory response in blood vessels throughout the body, including the small vessels that supply the brain. Chronically inflamed cerebral blood vessels deliver oxygen less efficiently. The hippocampus, which depends on a steady and clean blood supply, begins to operate under pressure. Researchers sometimes describe this as the brain running on a congested road. The fuel exists, but the delivery keeps getting interrupted. The second process is called glycation. When glucose levels remain elevated over time, glucose molecules bind to proteins in ways they shouldn't. The products of this binding, called advanced glycation, end products, or AGEs, accumulate in brain tissue. AGEs are stiff, dysfunctional, and pro-inflammatory. In the hippocampus, AGE accumulation is associated with faster neuronal loss and reduced synaptic plasticity, the brain's ability to form new connections. Research on glycation in older adults has found that markers of glycation in the bloodstream are associated with smaller hippocampal volume on MRI, even after accounting for age, diabetes status, and cardiovascular risk factors. The damage was occurring below the diagnostic threshold. That is the gray zone, not a diagnosis, a direction. Those are the mechanisms. But what does the data show when researchers actually measure hippocampal volume in real people over real time? That's where the neurology findings become hard to look away from. Research published in the journal Neurology examined the relationship between blood sugar control, measured as HbA1c, the standard 3-month average, and hippocampal structure in healthy older adults without diabetes. HbA1c below 5.7 is generally classified as normal. Between 5.7 and 6.4 is considered pre-diabetic. At 6.5 and above, the diagnosis is diabetes. What the researchers found was not a cliff at the diagnostic line, it was a slope. Participants in the upper half of the normal range, HbA1c, readings that most doctors would review and file as unremarkable, showed measurably smaller hippocampal volume compared to participants at the lower end of that same normal range. The relationship was continuous. As the number rose, the hippocampus shrank. No diagnosis required. The researchers also found that this association held after accounting for age, cardiovascular health, physical activity, and other variables known to affect brain structure. The signal from blood sugar was independent. It was its own story. This matters because of what it reveals about the gray zone. A person with an HbA1c of 5.3 and a person with an HbA1c of 5.9 are both within normal limits. Neither would receive any medical intervention. But the data suggests their hippocampi are aging at different rates. There is also longitudinal evidence. Research following older adults over several years has found that participants who maintained higher normal blood sugar throughout the study period showed faster hippocampal atrophy than those who maintained lower normal levels. Over time, the difference in hippocampal volume between the groups was large enough to show up on cognitive testing. The gray zone is not a safe zone. It is a zone where the trajectory is already forming. The mechanism is documented. The data is clear. So the question becomes what you can actually do about it and how much it takes to move the number. The research on blood sugar and the aging brain points to 3 evidence-based levers. None of them require a diagnosis to start. None of them require a prescription. The first lever is fiber. Of all the dietary factors studied in relation to blood sugar and hippocampal health, fiber consistently shows the strongest protective association. Fiber slows glucose absorption, flattening the spikes that drive the inflammation and glycation we just discussed. Research published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that adults over 60 with the highest dietary fiber intake had better cognitive performance compared to those with the lowest intake. The target the research points to, 25 to 30 grams of fiber per day. Most adults over 60 get roughly half that. The gap is large, and it shows up in the data. The most efficient single source, legumes. A half cup of cooked lentils contains approximately 8 grams of fiber. Add berries, vegetables, and whole grains, and the daily target becomes reachable without counting anything. The second lever is meal timing. Research from the University of Surrey found that eating the main meal earlier in the day, ahisi, and finishing eating by early evening produced measurably lower average blood glucose compared to the same foods consumed later. The body's insulin sensitivity follows a circadian pattern. Earlier meals use that window. Later meals work against it. The third lever is movement after eating. A 2022 review published in Sports Medicine found that just a few minutes of light walking after a meal measurably reduced post-meal blood glucose spikes in adults compared to sitting. Not a workout, a walk, a few minutes. 3 things: fiber up, legumes, vegetables, berries, whole grains. Eat earlier. Give the evening to fasting, not feeding. Walk after meals, even just a few minutes. Picture this. A 68-year-old woman, recently retired, goes to her annual physical. The doctor reviews her blood work line by line. Cholesterol, fine. Blood pressure, managed. Blood sugar, 5.8. Normal range, no concerns flagged. She leaves the appointment reassured, but she's been noticing for the past 2 years that words come a little slower, that she reads the same paragraph twice, that the mental sharpness she had by mid-morning now takes until noon to arrive. What the research consistently shows about people matching this profile, HbA1c in the upper normal range, cognitive changes they have described as just getting older, is that the hippocampus is already under pressure. The gray zone is doing what the gray zone does. Now picture the same woman, 6 months after 3 specific changes: more fiber at every meal, the evening eating window shortened by 2 hours, a short walk after dinner most nights. Her next HbA1c, 5.4. Still normal, just differently normal. The research suggests that for every measurable drop in HbA1c within the normal range, the rate of hippocampal atrophy slows. The trajectory shifts, not dramatically, not overnight, but in a different direction. If you've been noticing that memory takes more effort, that word retrieval is slower, that the mental sharpness of 10 years ago feels further away, here is what the research wants you to hear. The structure behind memory is not indifferent to what you feed it. The hippocampus is not simply aging. It is responding to an environment you have more control over than your last lab report suggested. The gray zone is not a verdict, it is a measurement. And measurements can change. You don't need a diagnosis to act. You don't need a dramatic overhaul to move the number. Fiber at every meal, an earlier dinner, a short walk. These are not small things disguised as large ones. They are the specific interventions the peer-reviewed evidence points to for blood sugar and brain health after 60. Your hippocampus is still capable of slower atrophy. The neurology data is not a warning about what has already happened. It is a map of what still responds. The research holds the data. You hold the fork. Have you ever had a doctor tell you your blood sugar was fine, and then wondered, fine compared to what? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. If this changed how you think about blood sugar and the aging brain, subscribe to Brain Health After 60. Next, we're looking at the 5 early signs your brain is asking for more support after 60. This channel translates peer-reviewed research into educational content. The voiceover is AI-generated. Full sources and disclaimers are in the description. Thank you for watching.